y'all looking at me like you're expecting me to ask a question. um, so, as most of you probably know, Minnesota has a divided legislature. We're very good at sending a combination of Democrats and Republicans to the legislature, but a Republican has not won statewide in Minnesota since 2006, when our esteemed guest, Tim Pawlenty, won his second term. So we're going to talk about, do the Republicans need to win statewide? Do they want to win statewide? What's it going to take for Republicans to win statewide? What's the magic formula, Governor Pawlenty? Do you want to go first?
Okay, well, yeah, first of all, good morning, and thank you for being here. I want to applaud the Star Tribune for convening this group. Minnesota's comparative advantage, America's comparative advantage is ideas and innovation and the clash and competition of ideas and innovation, and I think this group gathers in that spirit, and it's a wonderful gathering for that purpose. So thanks for the Star Tribune for hosting this and convening this group. And on a similar note, a similar vein, we need the clash of ideas in politics, in the political arena. And if you have a monopoly of one party or the other, whether it be at a city or a state level, that's perhaps suboptimal, to say the least, when it comes to the competition you'd have for political ideas and political innovation. As to the future of the Republican Party of Minnesota, as Rochelle has alluded to, we haven't won in a long time statewide. It's different for obvious reasons at the congressional level or the legislative level, because those are political microclimates, and they get managed at the local level through redistricting and various other ways that don't necessarily reflect what's going to happen statewide, and our legislators can talk about what the maps will look forward, project forward in that regard. But as to statewide races, it's true that Minnesota is at least a light blue state, if not a blue state, and the Republicans have been at a structural disadvantage politically in terms of the political demographic of the state for a few decades at least. And that doesn't mean we can't win from time to time, and it doesn't mean we can't win in the future, but we start with a uphill climb in the forms of having to come over at least a 2 to 4 point demographic disadvantage. Now it can happen, and it does happen. Nothing is inevitable, and things change. We were talking in the green room. If I would have told you 20 years ago or less that the Iron Range would soon be mostly Republican, you would have thought I lost my mind. Conversely, if I would have told you that Edina would soon be Democrat, you would have thought I lost my mind. So these trends and demographics shift and change over time. It's also true if you look at John F. Kennedy, for example, a pro-life, pro-gun, military interventionist, tax-cutting Democrat. He would never get endorsed by the Democratic Party of today. And similarly, Ronald Reagan, a pro-choice governor of California who raised taxes as president, who signed a big amnesty immigration bill when he was president. I love him as president, so don't get me wrong, it's not a criticism. I'm just trying to illustrate how these things shift over even just a few decades. So nothing stays the same as in life, as in politics, and I'm hopeful about the Republican Party's future, but it's going to have to grow market share. And so I'll stop with this. If you have a structural disadvantage, there aren't enough Republicans in the state of Minnesota to win statewide by just getting Republicans. That's different in places like Alabama or Georgia or Oklahoma. So here, the trick is you have to get some independents, more than your fair share of independents, and even some soft Democrats. And you got to have messages and candidates that resonate with that. The current measurement stick for Republican politics nationally and in Minnesota is mega politics. That has worked nationally, regardless of what you think about it. It has put the Republicans in a majority governing status at the president in the White House and the full Congress. But as applied to Minnesota, the political microclimate of Minnesota, it hasn't fully worked. And so you have President Trump having been on the ballot here 3 times and having lost 3 times. So part of the trick here is to have candidates that can satisfy the mega base, but also be able to attract independents and Democrats. And that's a tightrope walk for reasons we won't go into because we're short on time, but that's not something that's easy to do in today's Republican Party, but I think that's the way you can win statewide in Minnesota.
And I should point out that all 3 of these that both Senator Duckworth and Senator Coleman are constantly in the conversation in terms of running statewide at some point. Perhaps not in the next year, but Although I did hear Senator Coleman, you were still thinking about it.
Well, the big problem is Senator Duckworth and I are still fighting about who gets that amazing LG spot. So until we solve that, neither of us.
Well, that's the woman's spot, so as you know, so.
She's trying to get me in trouble up here.
But so what, can you talk a little bit about what would go into your thinking in terms of, I mean, is that fair to say that you two are both thinking about running statewide at some point?
Well, I think, one of the things, and I'll speak for myself and obviously let Julia weigh in too, but, part of what we look at are what conditions exist in the state of Minnesota, and there's a lot of talk that occurs regarding the suburbs specifically. I happen to live in the suburbs. I represent a suburban district, the great city of Lakeville and some of the surrounding communities. And a lot of folks would tell you that sometimes that's where the battle will be won or lost statewide in the metro. We know that greater Minnesota typically has become redder and redder. We know that Minneapolis-St. Paul and the inner suburbs have become bluer and bluer, and so that the suburban ring is the purple battleground, so to speak. And to what former Governor Pawlenty said earlier, the trick is, as a candidate, you have to find a way to solidify your most ardent grassroots supporter, your base, let them know where you stand, that you're conservative enough, while also during that process not losing your ability to appeal to your more moderate, independent, or even winnable Democrats, so to speak. And that's the trick. Maybe it used to be that you could pivot once you secured that endorsement or won that primary, but that's becoming increasingly more difficult to do, or so it would seem. And a lot of that has to probably do with the way things are covered and videos that are captured and shared on social media more so than maybe they were in the past. But that really is the challenge right now, is finding somebody that can truly be authentic, sincere, and genuine in their principles and their values to solidify conservatives of the Republican Party and then compete statewide with the folks they need to as well.
That would be tough.
I hear you.
It's a number of factors, too. Both Zach and I have very little kids, and so that's something to think about as well. It was the big reason at the end of the day I said no to the U.S. Senate, because I struggle being in St. Paul a couple days a week and missing out on soccer games and bedtime stories and stuff like that. I'm a big fan of Esther and being for such a time as this, and I think every candidate has to look at the moment and go, where am I needed most? Where am I supposed to be right now? And so that's a big factor. Looking at the bigger picture, though, it definitely is, to both of their points, Minnesota has a big independent streak. I mean, you just look at some of the people we've elected and kind of how the polls go and shift and form. And so we need somebody, again, that can be authentically themselves. There's a reason that both Senator Duckworth and I outperform the president quite a bit in our district. It's because we're not trying to be Donald Trump. We're just trying to be ourselves, and ourselves want our kids to go to school and get a good education. We want to be able to afford the homes that we live in and have a grocery bill that's manageable. We want clean water. We want growing infrastructure and roads that don't have so many potholes my motorcycle's going to tip over. We have so many things that we want to go talk to people about that aren't the spicy issues that I think will help a candidate resonate statewide. However, I was recently speaking to Ryan Faircloth about the assassinations that we've seen going on and what can we take a page out of. So I worked with Speaker Hortman on a couple of issues. Boy, does that woman know how to coalition build. And the Republican Party needs to learn that I would rather have a party filled with people I agree with 70% of the time than govern with people I agree with 15% of the time. And we really need to open up that tent. Truly open up that tent. And when you go to a convention, sometimes it can feel like you're under immense scrutiny or immense attack, and you bring new people in, and it should feel like you're going to church. I am so glad you're here. Thank you for coming. How can I get you involved? So it needs to be a more welcoming party to grow, first and foremost. After we do that, we can maybe have the luxury of infighting, but until we get a statewide race again, we don't have that. So my first boss was Charlie Kirk. And I've been trying to take a page. What is a lesson I can learn from all these people that, whether I agreed with them or not, I admired them? And from Charlie, it was Republicans have to stop saying college campuses are off limits. There's no chance of us making inroads there. There's no chance of us grabbing those younger generations that are now moving out into the suburbs and having families, but they haven't heard from the party since they were 18 years old and in college. We have to start actually talking to young people where they're at, much like Charlie did. So I think it's a multifaceted, big issue, but not one that's completely insurmountable.
Do you feel like there's buy-in for that position in the party right now, or, I mean, is there for broadening the tent, or, I mean, we're looking at, we're looking at the U.S. Senate race next year, and we don't have a really big name in the race, a sort of mainstream candidate. Probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but you don't have a mainstream big name candidate in the Senate race.
I think it's personal responsibility. I was talking to somebody else about this last week on a podcast. If I'm not bringing 30 people in to caucus night that want to see somebody who isn't afraid to work across the aisle, who wants to get things done, who doesn't think compromise is a dirty word, who wants to broaden the tent, then aren't I part of the problem if all I do is go pander to whoever shows up? If there's somebody that hasn't come out to caucus since the good old days of the other Senator Coleman and Governor Pawlenty because they think the party's leaving them, well, damn it, roll up your sleeves, spend 2 Saturdays helping us take the party back then. And so it is the personal responsibility of we need to bring our own people out to decide who these candidates are, decide who should be in the party, all of that fun stuff.
Wow.
More than just 2 Saturdays.
Right.
There's also a Tuesday involved, yeah.
Well, what about, I mean, how do you balance, how do you manage to pivot? How can you pivot then? I mean, if going from trying to get the endorsement, I mean, Governor Pawlenty, it's no secret you were wooed for the U.S. Senate race, the coming one. It doesn't, sounds like as of now you're not interested, that you don't think you would get through the endorsement process or win a primary.
Right.
So personal responsibility. Couldn't you bring enough fans to the caucus, or?
Well, that you summarized it well. As applied to me in the Senate race, it's something I would consider, except I can't get endorsed or win a primary in my own party. So that's part of the problem. But beyond that, I wanted to add one other thing regarding Republicans' fortunes in the future. If you look at the history of Republicans winning in statewide races in Minnesota, governor's races as an example, they often get help through unforced errors from the other side. And so this is more than just what are the Republicans doing and who are they nominating. It's also what are the Democrats doing and who are they nominating, or the other parties too. So let's look at 1978 when Al Quie beat Rudy Perpich. Rudy Perpich was involved in appointing Wendy Anderson to the Senate in a way that became very toxic for Rudy Perpich. And then, of course, the economy had cratered as well. So when you have a bad economy and a bad stumble by a governor, that sets up some opportunity to help overcome that structural advantage that I talked about earlier. Some of you may be old enough to remember 1990 when Arnie Carlson beat, guess who? Rudy Perpich. Because Rudy Perpich didn't have the self-awareness to realize that his shelf life had sort of expired, or his use-by date had expired, and he wanted to keep running. And people by then many had dubbed him Governor Goofy. And so, he was sort of baked by that point, but he insisted on running. So the Republicans got an assist, even if it's just incremental, can win under those circumstances. So we don't know a year from now what the macro environment's going to look like relative to Trump, relative to the economy. I can tell you without going into all the details, Governor Walz he'll be here later today, but his numbers are softer than they used to be, which sort of creates a window or a band of opportunity for Republicans if they nominate at least a serviceable candidate. And candidates get better over the course of campaigns. They get practice and rehearse. As long as they don't say something really stupid, they tend to get better over time. And so I think it's going to be a competitive race. And that could reset the Republican Party in Minnesota if you had a governor who could help lead and articulate a vision for the future.
Does having a you won twice with a third-party candidate. Do you think you would have won without the third-party candidate?
Well, you and I talked about this in the green room, but this is boring history, and we're supposed to be talking about looking forward. But
well, sorry. If you want to ask the questions.
2002, I won with 45 or 46% of the vote. Then Senate Majority Leader Roger Moe by the way, different era of civility. We had a debate a few weeks before, and we were beating the crap out of each other on television and TV ads, and we were up in a debate in Bemidji, and I flew and he drove, so I invited him to fly back with me, and we drank beer the whole way on the plane, 2 or 3 weeks before the election, only to get into a thunderstorm. There's no bathroom on the plane, and we had some issues there. But it was a great conversation. Great conversation till the end. But anyhow, I digress. So I won with 45. Roger had 35. Penny had something like 15. So I told Rochelle, Penny was center left, although, I think, so if you allocated 2/3 of his vote to Roger, that would have put him at 45. If you would give me 1/3 of his votes, it would have put me at, something in high 40. So I think I still would have won, but it would have been much closer.
And so the factors for hope for next year, if you want to look to the future.
Thank God you finally get into the topic.
I mean, are you confident in the field right now that they can mount a serviceable challenge to Walls?
I think that remains to be seen. I think to what Governor Pawlenty has shared, when you talk about the conditions being set, I think the stage sort of is set for a strong Republican candidate to succeed statewide. I think one of the interesting things about Minnesota in particular is we have a lot of folks that'll split ticket vote. They don't necessarily go in to vote red or blue. I'll have people show up on election day, they'll vote for Angie Craig and then they'll vote for me, or make up your mixture. And so when you have folks in the state right now who are worried about rampant fraud going on to the tune of maybe over $1 billion across the state, and we're still finding more, when they've got public safety concerns, when they see what's happening in our public schools and the decline of academic performance and enrollment, and when they see the cost of living and their taxes increasing, their property taxes, their different forms of insurance, when they had a $10 billion tax increase despite the government having a $20 billion surplus and spending all of it, I think there's a real opportunity for a strong candidate to capitalize on that, especially a lot of your free-thinking, independent, moderate voters who aren't necessarily worried about voting about a party, but are looking for someone who can actually govern responsibly. And that's really what it comes down to. Our state is at a precipice right now where if we don't begin to experience some responsible governing, there are some holes that we're going to be unable to dig ourselves out of. And that's why, to what was the point that was made earlier, you need strong parties, at least 2 of them, in any state to have good, responsible governing. Because if either party gets their way, most recently we've seen they kind of steamroll and just pass things that maybe aren't vetted to the extent they should be. And in my opinion, that's not responsible governing. And the people of Minnesota deserve a government that's going to be responsible and accountable to them.
Senator Coleman, your thoughts on?
Ditto. He summarized it so perfectly.
I mean, is it enough? Is it enough for Republicans to be on a check on the governor's office with your stronger position in the legislature? I mean, control the House now,
Right.
And it looks like you're going to end up very evenly split again in the Senate. Is that enough of a check, or do you need?
Well, clearly it hasn't been.
Yeah, I'll give you just my very personal opinion. I'm a small business guy. I have a couple small businesses, and how you run them, especially the executive leadership, is extremely important. One of the reasons why it might be beneficial to see a turnover in the governor's position is for an executive to really look at all of our government agencies and departments. Clearly, we've got some issues. They aren't running the best, and they're great people. I love our state employees and our workers. They're Minnesotans. They're trying to do their best. But we need somebody who's going to hold these departments and agencies accountable and work with commissioners that are going to say, not only have we identified fraud, what are we doing to actually stop it, prevent it, and be more on top of it, so to speak. Every week we're discovering another issue with state government, and we're talking about real people's livelihoods, their dollars being sent to fraudulent places all across the state, the country, outside our country. And that's a significant issue that if we don't get somebody in there right now to sort of turn the apple cart, so to speak, then we're just going to get more of the same, it would seem.
But then why aren't we seeing a bigger field of Republicans running for governor next year? I mean, it seems like there's decent conditions, and we broke it down in the green room in terms of numbers. It looks like it's pretty even right now. Why aren't we seeing more candidates?
I think we're going to see more, is my just listening to the buzz. I'm not going to name names, but I think we have a couple more coming out of the woodwork. So I do think the field is going to get bigger. I think that gives a candidate the ability to not necessarily have to go extraordinarily hard to the base, because that's going to be detrimental when we go to November. But then when you talk about leading the agencies, when we talk about the future of the Republican Party, I'd love to get your opinion on this, is say the dog catches the mail cart and we elect a Republican governor, and we haven't had one in decades. Who are we filling these agencies with? Are we taking half of the Republican legislature and filling these agencies? I mean, that's one of the things that gubernatorial candidates will have to keep in mind, is if we want efficient agencies, they have to start kind of thinking of names for people in the cabinets now without, all the talent went to other states. So we would have to pick from the legislature itself. Where are these people coming from?
Well, you managed to do it when you were governor.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Senator. And I think most campaigns, if they feel like they might win, they have a shadow or quiet transition committee that forms and start doing the thought work around who could, from the private sector, might be interested, who from the public sector might be interested, and eventually you put it together because you have to.
Right.
But that's a wonderful point about it's not just the governor, it's who he or she is going to fill the team out with. I did want to say one other thing, if I might, Rochelle, just digressing back to the earlier point. On the governor's race, there's another variable that could be semi-unique here, which is Governor Walz's decision to run for an unprecedented third consecutive term. And there's going to be a certain percentage of Minnesotans, regardless of what they think of Governor Walz or his opponents, who just say in their mind, it's time for somebody new, regardless of the other politics, that it's time to give somebody else a turn. And even if that's as small as 1 or 3%, and early polling indicates it's at least that, in a tight race, that could be the margin of error. I mean, that could be the opportunity for Republicans to take the race. And the other thing to keep in mind is, again, I talked about macro factors earlier, but Governor Walz is going to have a lot of money. I mean, he has the ability to raise, directly and indirectly, a mountain of money. I mean, he talks about that frequently, so I'm not saying things he doesn't say himself. So that's going to be a relative advantage in terms of campaign spending.
Did I flat out ask you, Senator Coleman, if you ruled out running for governor next year? Because you
I think
said
you just
not.
did.
Well, you did. You said you're not interested in going to D.C., but you have joked about moving to St. Paul.
That was a request by my oldest son. My in-laws live near Summit Avenue, and I showed him the governor's mansion, and he went, "That's really close to Grandma and Papa. You should live there." Well, I said, "Well, I'd have to run for governor." "Okay, do that." So, I never say no to an opportunity, but I also, when I was talking to Ryan, I said the completely non-political answer, which is very harsh, is my kids have had one rough summer. They started it off with a cop outside their home, and they couldn't figure out why Mom was so scared one day in June and so sad. My kindergartner's very first day at Catholic school, he was on lockdown. And I just had another death threat last week. And so right now I just want to keep them very unaware of what's going on in the world. And it's been done. When my father-in-law ran, Lori was very good about grabbing the paper off the front desk before the kids saw it, about we don't watch the news and we don't answer the phone unless Dad's home. But it can be done. But right now it's just, let's find a good groove for the kids, and then I can think about what I'm doing tomorrow.
Senator Coleman's father-in-law is former Senator Norm Coleman, FYI, for those.
Yes, so I have to be very careful when people advertise that Senator Coleman's coming to something, because if they expect Norm and I show up, there's this, disappointment.
What else?
Well, I think besides tactics, the Republicans also have to have a positive vision for the future of Minnesota and the future of the country. And so we can talk about money and, third terms and all these things. It's interesting. But if you want to go get an increased piece of the market, you got to go earn it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of voters want to hear about how are you going to address, all voters want to hear about how you're going to address their concerns. So example, in Minnesota, we have 50% of our children in schools proficient in reading, math, and science at grade level. 50% of our children aren't at grade level. And it's abysmal. And if you don't have a pathway for an education, you can't later connect to the private economy, and you get kicked to the curb in a big hurry as an adult. And so I hope the next set of candidates from Minnesota for the Republican Party will talk deeply and passionately about education reform. I also hope they'll talk about fraud, which has been mentioned. I also hope they'll talk about public safety. If you don't think that's on Minnesotans' minds, of course it is, and there's a better way forward on that as well. And I could go on, but the point is, we can't just say, you know, they suck or they suck. We have to say, and more importantly, here's what we'll do better. Here's what we'll do differently. Here's a positive vision about Minnesota, and care, and not just be robots for, you know, the script of today, because people need vision casters. Nothing stays the same. It always evolves. It always shifts, and leaders have to see around the corner, articulate a vision, and bring people with them.
Senator Duckworth, you think the party needs to do a better job talking about education. What do you think you should do? How should you talk about it in a way you think that would resonate?
Sure. So I'm a former school board member myself before I ever got tricked into running for state senate. I've got 4 little kids. They all go to school in Lakeville. I'm a product of Lakeville schools myself, and so is my wife. So I'm very passionate about our public schools. And I think when you get into political discourse and debate, one party in particular has done a really good job painting Republicans as not being supportive of our public schools or public education or teachers, which could not be further from the truth. I always tell folks, we want nothing more than to see our public schools succeed, because if our public schools are succeeding, it means our kids are succeeding, our teachers are fulfilled, and we are setting conditions for a bright and successful future. That's really what it matters. At the state capitol, really what it's become about, the discussion is about academics. Are we going to focus on and set the conditions for the academic success of our kids, or are we going to allow for the classroom and what goes on in our schools to become a little bit more politicized? And we can get into and have that debate, and we can spar a little bit. But unfortunately, sometimes our vision, it's hard to get folks excited about, because it has less to do with emotion and sometimes more to do with results. Our vision for our public schools are schools in which our kids are succeeding at a high level academically. They're safe. They've got a lot of opportunity. Graduation rates are high, and they're going on to do whatever it is they want to do post-graduation, whether that means higher education or going into the workforce, you name it. And so there may be other initiatives that pull at heartstrings a little bit more, or do a little bit better of a job of enticing voters or getting them to think that you support public schools more than the other party. But that's what we have to do. And you know, they try to say that, you know, we don't want to fund our public schools. Well, that's not the case. The last time that we had an impasse and didn't figure out what to do with what we had at the time, a $10 billion surplus, it was our party that was saying we want to give our public schools $1 billion, but we want to give it to them without strings attached. We want it to go to the general education formula, or the special education cross subsidy. Not all these mandates that are actually going to force districts into deficit, which is what we saw, because they're requiring them to spend way more money than the state's actually giving them on things that those districts don't even necessarily want to or need to invest in. If you asked every district right now across the state, what are your needs, they're going to give you different answers. And what they want is the funding and the freedom and the autonomy to utilize it in the way they need to, their community would like them to do it, rather than the state mandating how they do it. And so that's part of the problem, is how do we ensure that our vision also includes that aspect of local control and respecting various communities, their needs, and what they would like to achieve or see for their kids, specifically when it comes to their public schools. And I think that's going to be, I think, you know, Governor Pawlenty is 100% correct to key in on education, because originally, don't hold this against me, originally I'm from the great state of Iowa, okay? I did go to middle school and high school and college here in Minnesota. But there was a time when, and I still feel this way, but the metrics don't necessarily support it, when Minnesota schools were the cream of the crop. Every other state in the country desired and were envious of our public schools, their performance. And right now, when you stack up, especially literacy rates, performance on math and things of that nature with other states across the country, they don't look as good as they used to. That's a tough pill for us to swallow. It's tough to admit. But that's why we have to roll up our sleeves, put politics aside, keep them out of the classroom, and focus on the academic success and excellence of our kids.
Well, so then is it a matter of better messaging, or is it better candidates, or
You should just listen to my messaging. No,
I mean, that's a hard case. How do you make that case to people in the 60 seconds or the amount of time you've got at the door, or however you're going to make it? I mean, is it messaging or is it candidates, and how do you get over that hurdle?
I think it's a combination. First and foremost, you have to be consistent about your messaging. And what happens is everybody wants to take you in a different direction, especially when it comes to education, right? We're talking about...
what do you mean by everybody wants to take you in a different direction?
Well, I should say when you get into a political debate or discussion, folks want to pivot and take you to a different direction. They want to talk about banning books. They want to talk about...
When you talk about folks, are you talking about like at a party meeting? Are you talking about bigger picture?
Well, your question was how do you succeed with your messaging?
Okay.
So while you're trying to project your messaging, folks that may not want you to be successful want to take away or confuse from that messaging and swing in a different direction, if that makes sense.
So you need to stay on message.
You need to stay on message and not be distracted by folks that want to take you in a different direction and have you talk about other things rather than focusing on the future or the problems that we should be identifying or addressing, specifically when it comes to education, or pick your topic.
Okay, so staying on message better.
But your message also has to be a good one. It does you no good to stay on message if your message is kind of crappy, right? So you have to identify a great message that speaks to voters, that understands where they are right now with their kids in their classrooms and what they're experiencing, and then stay on that and convince people that that's the direction to go.
And is this a matter of having a transformational candidate at the top of the ticket that everybody follows, or does this come from the ground up, or some combination, or within?
Sure. Well, I'm doing a lot of talking, so I'll stop. But I certainly think that helps. You have to have a dynamic, at least in this state, in order to succeed, I think, as a Republican. You have to have good personable skills. You have to be dynamic enough to not only sell that vision, but to communicate it in a way that gets people excited and optimistic about the future and voting for you. We had somebody do it a little while ago, and that's kind of what we need to return to.
You talking about him?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, I mean, not to tell tales out of school, but, at the end of the day in these campaigns, what happens is there's a whole bunch of people who are going to vote Republican no matter what. There's a whole bunch of people who vote Democrat no matter what. Doesn't matter who the candidates are. Almost doesn't matter what the commercials are. They vote robotically, red or blue.
And it's close. Explain the percentage a little bit. It's close. It's what were you saying? 42, 44.
In the end, at the end. But then you have the independents who decide the election and the ticket splitters, as we talked about. And so, the pollsters will slice and dice who those people are, how they think, what makes them vote. They'll stack rank the issues 1 to 10 on what's the most vote motivating issues for independents, and then they'll tell you to go talk about those 3 issues all day long, every day, as passionately as you can. And the sweet spot is if one of those 3 or 4 issues also drives turnout with your base. So you get a twofer. So, the duality of these things is you have to drive the turnout, because relative turnout, incremental turnout for the blue team or the red team can decide the election. So each side has to make sure their base is motivated and passionate and excited to donate and get out and vote. Okay, but then you got to you're slicing more of the independents. And if you find an issue, let's say, for example, it's crime, that both is base motivating for Republicans and appealing to suburban voters, you are all over that like a rat on a Cheeto. So, I mean, they're like, well, why is all he's doing is talking about crime every day? It's because in October and September, after you've already got all the other people accounted for, you're trying to get that last slice of the independents, and, you got data that shows that's the vote driving issue for 2/3 of the independents. I don't know what it'll be in next fall, but it'll be something like that.
And if I may add, if our remaining time, we need to get more women into this party. We desperately need to get more women into this party, particularly young women. When I got elected, I was the youngest woman ever elected to the state Senate on both sides. I remained the youngest Republican woman in the legislature years later. We need to start getting moms that are walking in the shoes of working mothers. Prior to my getting there, people didn't know in the state of Minnesota that you can go take a smoke break and not get docked pay, but if you go pump, you're docked pay. People didn't know that there's lead and arsenic in feminine hygiene products. People didn't know a whole host of issues that we've brought forth. Our party brought forth the paid family leave proposal in the Senate, a free market paid family leave proposal to cover the gaps in the system. And so if we don't start getting more of those voices in, I don't see the future of the Republican Party. So if there's any young women out there that are listening and saying, it might be too much, it might be the wrong time. I was 9 months pregnant when my state senator retired. It is never the right time. But
With
just
the
you gotta
twins
do
or
it.
the other?
Oh, I started and ended the race pregnant. I was 9 months pregnant. I announced I was running. I had my baby. A year later, I won and found out I was having twins. So if I can do it, you can do it too.
And you're not the only one. Others had young children and have had babies in office. So that's our, I guess we will close on that pitch for more women to run for office.
Yes.
Sorry, guys.
Thank you.
I guess we're done unless we want to do a little open mic. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you.